for a believer in Islam, when they go through a trial such as a disability, if they are patient with what God has decreed, then they actually are rewarded immensely. Now, in Islam, it's not looked on as something which is negative. There's a beautiful story which occurred at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him. And there was a lady, and she had a disability which she was having a lot of problems with. She came to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, and she actually said to him, "O Prophet and Messenger of God, can you please supplicate to God, to Allah, and ask Him to, remove this disability and this illness from me?" So he said to her that he can do that, but he gave her a choice. If you are patient with the trial, with this test that Allah has decreed upon you, then if you have patience, then your reward will be paradise. But she said to the Prophet, peace and blessing upon him, "Can you make supplication to Allah and ask Him that when I have a problem and severe shaking because of my disability, because of my illness, that my body parts are not exposed?" And so the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he supplicated to Allah, and she was never exposed again when she had severe illness, severe shaking with her disability and her illness.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Chair Chat. Religious belief and practice plays an important role in the lives of billions of people worldwide, yet little is known of the spiritual lives of people with disability. Tonight, we will explore the realm of disability, spirituality and religion. And to shed light on the matter, we have with us Andy Calder, Minister of the Uniting Church, Synod of Victoria and Tasmania, Vic Gresty from SICMA, or Springvale Indo-Chinese Mutual Assistance Association, and Lauren Hayes, a theology student who has been involved with various church and ministry activities. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Andy, if I may start with you, why is it necessary to recognise the important role that spirituality plays in the quality of a person's life?
Within Australia, for a so-called secular society, something in the order of 65% of people say that for them a deity, a sense of spirituality is an important part of their life. But it seems to be this intersection of spirituality and disability is something that we really don't talk about very much. It's as if it's a taboo.
You've done extensive research on the matter, and one of which was the Multi-Faith and Disability Project called To Belong, I Need to Be Missed, and that was first of its kind in Australia. Could you tell us what some of its key findings were?
Yes, the Uniting Church partnered with some funding from the Office for Disability, and they recognised that many faith communities are in fact part of the government's social inclusion agenda. Faith communities haven't been considered as part of that. So we interviewed 18 people with disabilities and leaders from Buddhist, Jewish, Christian and Islamic traditions. And it was very, very interesting to have a comparative stories, if you like, of the good things, the not so good things that were happening. And the three main things that people told us that were very important to them were, firstly, that they wanted to be able to get into the building, into the place of worship. The second was that they want to feel welcomed, as anybody would. And the third thing was that they would like to have a say in what their participation would be, to be afforded the opportunity to be a leader, to do tasks that anybody else in a faith community would do, rather than being seen as people who were passively involved. So they were the three very important things.
Yeah, Vic, if I may ask you, you are a disability support officer with Sigma, and recently you staged an Aged and Disability Services Expo titled Vietnamese Happy Living Day. Could you tell us what this was about?
Yes, back to 2008, I had done a small research with the Vietnamese carer who care for children with disability. The research has shown that there are some issues like lack of understanding about disability and disability services, language barrier. They have refugee background, and they like stigma attached to the disability, and that's why I find a way to do the expo to provide some information for the Vietnamese community, understand more about disability and disability services, and it's also provide for the service provider have face-to-face chat with the Vietnamese community to understand their need. It also we established the strong network with other organizations, and we hope that whatever they learn from the expo will assist them to change or to minimize the stigma about disability.
Fantastic. Now, Lauren, you have a keen interest in theology, and you have been involved with various church and ministry activities. Could you describe to us how participating in your faith community influences your life?
Sure. I guess it's similar to being part of any sort of community, whether it's a choir or a sporting club or something. It gives you a kind of a space and a place to belong, and you have people that you connect with similar interests. And I guess for me, because there's that faith element as well, it's an opportunity to meet other people who share that same faith and to form kind of deeper relationships with, and to be nutting out some of those perhaps more deeper theological questions that sometimes we often ask that perhaps maybe we don't necessarily feel like we can perhaps talk about in the same way in a mainstream society, although that's certainly important. But when you have people that are, I guess, on a similar wavelength to you in terms of faith, you can really be nutting out those issues together. And then there's also through churches and other perhaps ministry groups that I've been involved with, there's that common interest of serving people and helping people, and so I guess for me that's why I think it's important to be part of a faith community.
Why do you think that engagement with religious community is a relevant topic for people with disabilities?
I think it's really important because people with disabilities are wanting access to all areas of society, and I think for whatever reason, faith communities is something, as Andy was saying, that isn't talked about much, and access to that is somehow left off the list. I think we find perhaps with disability service providers, there's advocacy around accessibility to public spaces, but perhaps because a lot of the faith communities run their services or programs on weekends, and then disability service providers may not work then, and so getting access to those things for some people can be more difficult.
Yes.
When faith communities are often a microcosm, I suppose, of the larger society, so you see reflections, you see people from diverse backgrounds, but people with disabilities are often missing from those communities. So I think it's an issue that really needs to be talked about more.
Definitely, and thanks everyone. Well, we'll be back with more after the break.
Just the whole thought of being an autistic Mormon, sometimes it's very hard to take the first step into the religion, let alone proceed any further. There's an enforced quiet and being the type that likes to talk. I always want to know more, so that's why I would love the church to be able for me to attend via Skype.
So I wish there was a community-based aspect to it, which at the moment is not really there. They've got cater for people with disabilities from a social perspective, fulfilling their social needs, because I think that's also just as important. You can have a program and a particular time of the week or a weekend, and definitely if someone like Vision Australia, which deals with people with visual impairments, or other organisations that deal with people with disabilities, Imams can mention in their bulletin or in their newsletter that on this particular day we'll have someone come in and explain about disabilities or a particular disability. People that want to come and attend can come and listen to this. We'll just give some, more like an educational program. I think that's the way to go about it.
Hi, welcome back. Tonight we're talking about disability, spirituality and religion. So we come to the perennial question that perhaps most people with disabilities have asked at some point in their lives, which is, why me? Lauren, has this question ever crossed your mind? And if so, how do you explain it in terms of your faith?
It has crossed my mind, but probably more so when I was younger. And when you're going through your adolescent years and sort of thinking about your identity and how your disability kind of fits in with that. And I suppose I thought about it then, and as someone who had just started to begin to explore my Christian faith, I initially had that idea of, oh, well, maybe God's given me this disability for a reason and I can use it for really positive things and whatnot. And as I've gotten older, I guess my views of my own disability have changed, and I probably now tend to ask the question, well, why not me? I'm not any different, I'm not any more special, and disability is something that can affect all of us. And I guess in terms of my own faith, I don't see myself as being chosen or anything like that. It's just part of what's happening, and I don't necessarily have a specific explanation. I don't think there's really any kind of black and white for that kind of question, really. Yeah.
Yeah, well, some people actually think that people with disabilities are perhaps closer to God, or that they're free from sin, or maybe conversely they have sinned too much, or that they deserve charity and our sympathy. What do you make of these stereotypes? Yeah,
they're really annoying stereotypes, but they're really persistent, and they have been for centuries. And I guess from a Christian perspective, when you look at Jesus and his ministry and the way that he treated people with disabilities, he really wanted to turn those stereotypes upside down and try and change them, but we're still trying to catch on to that even now. And I think those stereotypes and those views can be really damaging to people with disabilities because they think that there's something wrong with them, or that maybe because they've got a disability it means their faith isn't good enough, and it can cause all kinds of issues. But for some reason it's taking such a long time to shake those kinds of views and to change them.
Yes. Vic, in the work that you do, many of your clients are from a Buddhist Vietnamese background. In your experience, what do you think is a general perception towards disability?
Yes, with the Buddhist community, they believe in karma and reincarnation. And reincarnation is the rebirth after for the next life. And the next life will be if you do the good thing in this life, and then you will have some good thing in the next life. And that's why with the disability, having people with disability is something very shameful and feeling sinful for the family. And that's why they want to need to do something good in this life to be free of that. Yeah.
Okay. Andy, your research, the Multi-Faith and Disability Project, it's called To Belong, I Need to Be Missed. I find the title very fascinating. It actually struck a chord with me, and I've been thinking about it for quite some time. Could you tell us what's the inspiration behind it and what it actually means?
It comes from the interviews that I referred to earlier, talking to different people in different faith communities, and one particular person who I was speaking with spoke about the connection that they have within the community that they're a part of, that they feel embraced by that community. They felt that they weren't there and just tolerated. So for them, the lovely welcome, people saying hello and being treated as anybody else in the community would be done. They then said, to belong here, I need to be missed. And so for them it was a powerful statement that they, in a sense, found a home on that particular Saturday or Sunday, whenever the community gathered, that was like a sanctuary in a way from the rest of the everyday life, when often the barriers, the sense of exclusion is so present. Here they were with their faith community and could really feel a sense of deep welcome. So that's where it came from.
So it's not just about inclusion, like having access to a venue. It's more about, I guess, the relationship that one has with that community.
That's right, friendships and being invited, being part of hospitality, meals together in each other's homes, just going out, having a coffee. So really people feeling as though they weren't objects of fear.
Often we hear cliches such as, if you have faith, you will be cured, or that God has chosen this for you, or that we all have our crosses to bear. And these types of cliches are common in most religions and are intended to comfort or provide religious resolve. Yet sometimes this might lead to spiritual trauma or abuse for the intended recipient. What are your views on this?
It's a very good question, and from a Christian perspective, I find them very problematic responses. People naturally seem to say these things, but when you analyse it a little bit, it's really saying because of who you are, you've done something wrong, disability equals sin. And I think it's a pastoral, a personal response that we need to really rethink and find other ways of saying to somebody, okay, this is your situation, what does your faith mean to you in this circumstance? Rather than just perpetuating something that seems to suggest God has made that person suffer, they have to endure it, become victims. And I think we need to really look at how we can turn that around with a different way of communicating about that.
Very true. We'll be back with more after the break.
I have a son called Ollie, 11-year-old Ollie, who has multiple disabilities, including autism, epilepsy and intellectual disability. Jewish tradition teaches us of our obligation to ensure equal access for all people and to help facilitate the full participation of individuals with disabilities in religious and public life. Do not separate yourself from the community. Accordingly, we must prevent anyone from being separated against their will. We have been clients of an organisation called Jewish Care. The main service they've provided to us has been respite. We take our son once a month on a Saturday for 5 hours, and he's cared for by qualified and trained disability carers and paid. They're paid. They do embrace disability and do whatever they can to enable people with disability to participate in society and to have access. I think we're actually experiencing, it's not just what the theory says, but it's actually really happening. We're so committed to accepting and protecting and respecting and loving Ollie that we put it on a t-shirt. just to, if you like, certify our commitment. And Ollie's got a T-shirt too.
Hi, welcome back. Vic, could you tell us some of your the outcomes of the Vietnamese Happy Living Day Expo, and do you have anything planned for the future?
Yes, the expo were very successful because of the great work of our college, our management, the volunteer group, and all the participants. We had some very positive feedback from the expo, and because the disability is affect the many family in many ways. For example, like if they have a child with a disability, they don't want to say that I have a child with a disability. They prefer to say that my child is sick, and that's why we plan that we use the education is the key to work with the Vietnamese community, and we continue to organize expo and other activity with the hope that the stigma about disability will reduce, and people will look in the disability in more positive way, provide education and bring the most benefit for the Vietnamese community.
Excellent. Lauren, you have been involved with an organisation called Luke 14, part of Christian Blind Mission. Could you tell us more about Luke 14 and what they do?
The name, it's called Luke 14 because in the Gospel of Luke in the Bible, in chapter 14, Jesus talks about inviting the blind and the lame and people with disabilities to banquets, and we don't really think about that very much today because we don't really do banquets in the same way that they did in ancient Israel and in the Roman Empire, but back then it was a really prestigious thing who went to banquets and how big your banquet was and who you invited. It was all very kind of social and hierarchical, and people with disabilities were just excluded from that and really shunned and kind of on the edges of those communities. And so Jesus kind of says, no, invite them and include them, which is quite a big thing and quite shocking to people who would have heard that at the time. And so Luke 14 looks at that in a modern day perspective and has a lot of Bible study resources, materials for including people with disabilities in the life of the church community, whether it's access to buildings and thinking about how people with disabilities can be actively involved in their church communities, not just as kind of a token thing, but actively using their gifts and their skills as any other members of a church would do. And you can look for those resources by going to www.cbm.org.au and follow the links to Luke 14.
That's a great initiative. Andy, what are some of the positive initiatives that religious communities have undertaken to meet the needs of people with disabilities?
Within my own faith community, the Uniting Church, across the Synod of Victoria and Tasmania, we've developed a disability action plan, and so that sets out a whole number of steps that people might consider, similar to what Lauren has mentioned with Luke 14, so that we have a plan and an actual process for change, and that we're reviewing that at the moment. It's now 10 years old, so it needs some freshening up. With the other research that we've spoken about, I've been liaising with the Buddhist Council of Victoria, and they've produced in 3 languages an audit of all their temples. So that's been a terrific initiative where they want to look at how they can make their temples more accessible. I've recently been invited to speak with Jewish Care, and they want to also look at how within the Jewish community they might similarly look at synagogue access and other relational building that enhances the friendships and community connection for and with people with disabilities. So there's some really good things going on out there beyond the Christian community as well.
Well, all of you are doing some great work in this field, and I wish you all the best. But unfortunately, this is all we have time for. As always, we'd like to thank our guests for being on the show and shedding light on the matter.
Thank
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. See you next week.